Now we're going to talk about communicating with governments and then go on to talk about communicating in business environments. This is something I'm not so much of an expert on, so I've relied very heavily on interviews with people who do this and on best practice books. So let's start with government. Why would you want to talk to the government? Well, I guess there are three main reasons. One is because you want some money. Governments have money. We like money as scientists. In astronomy, this is perhaps the major reason why we communicate with the government. We want telescopes, observatories, supercomputers, facilities, and the government might give it to us if we ask them nicely. This is a large part of what many scientists spend their time doing, trying to figure out how to get funding to continue their science. It sounds greedy, but scientists need to be paid. Once upon a time, science was only done by very wealthy billionaires in their spare time, and we don't particularly want to go back to that. So in which case there's got to be money from somewhere. Another possibility for why you might want to talk to government is because of regulations. If you're a company or a university science lab, regulations may make your work impossible. For example, a ban on stem cells or a ban on testing your rocket or something like this can make things very, very hard. So you might need to persuade governments to allow you to do what you do, or to change the regulations to make it easier, or maybe have more regulations to make it safer. And then, of course, it's influencing public policy. So we might want to persuade the government they need to do more about global warming, or they need to prepare for a pandemic, or something like this. So, like every other form of communication, the first rule of talking to government is know your audience. In the case of government, this is often who do you talk to in government? Government is not a single entity, it's a huge number of people. Do you talk to the Prime Minister, the President? Do you talk to the ministers? If so, which ministers? Minister for Science, the Minister of Industry? Do you talk to ministerial advisors and staffers? Every minister has an office which is staffed with people, and they control access to the minister, and usually the minister will take their advice, so maybe you're better to talk to them rather than straight to the minister. And then there are all the public servants, civil servants, the administrators in the bureaucracy, and they come in many different departments at many different levels, and finding the right person amongst them to talk to is a crucial skill. And as usual, this involves lots of listening. So you might talk to the first person and say who do they think you should talk to and what's their role. Once you've found out who you should be talking to, you need to know more about these people. What do they want from your communications? Why would they listen to you? Why have they asked you to talk to them? What are they after? Have they got a problem that needs solving? Then you have to bear in mind these people are very busy, and also know what their backgrounds are. At least in Australia, most politicians and ministers and staffers do not have a science background. In most Western countries, there are a lot of lawyers among them. This differs from country to country, but they might be interested in science. Maybe they don't like science, but find out as much as possible about the people you're going to be talking to, just like for any other form of communication. And once again, there's a feedback loop. What you tell them may not be what they understand. They may not react the way you want or you expect, and so you need to be sensitive to this and listen a lot to them, just like all other forms of communication. Now, as a scientist or technical person speaking to government, there are kind of four roles that you might play. One is the technical advisor or pure scientist role. This might be the government asks you a specific question and you give them a specific answer. For example, what should be in our stockpile to prepare for the next pandemic? Or how can we improve infrastructure in a city? Or something like this. That's very straightforward. They ask you a question, you give an answer. But there are more complicated roles. Another role is that of an advocate, someone pushing for a particular position. This may be you want to give us some money, please. We need this new telescope that will revolutionise the study of astronomy. If only we had some more money. Or it could be that you're pushing a particular line. We really need to do more about global warming. We really need to prepare. There could be a pandemic. There could be flooding. We need to get ready for it, or at least do a study about it, or something like that. So you're advocating a particular point of view. And then there's a rather sneaky one called the stealth advocate. This is where you're pretending to be a technical advisor, but actually you're really lobbying for something. So let's say the government asked you, what do we do about energy? And you would say, well, we've got to have nuclear energy because you think nuclear energy is really important. So you might try and skew the argument to try and lead them to your particular point of view, but you're pretending to be an objective advisor as opposed to advocate where you're definitely pushing a particular point of view. And finally, there's facilitator. Facilitator, you're helping them come to a conclusion. This often involves, for example, broadening it out. They might ask you, should we do this or that? And you say, well, have you thought about a third possibility? That might be quite good. So give them a range of options and suggest the pluses and minuses of all of them. Now, which role you should take depends a bit on the situation. Just like we've talked about before with the media, there are some situations which are factually based and some where it's actually the values that are going on. So there could be a technical issue. A technical issue is something like how you best maintain aging transport infrastructure. So let's say your trains and buses and cars are all falling to pieces, they're too old. What's the best way to upgrade it? Now, this is not a very political thing. I mean, it might be a little bit political because, for example, the rail company might want you to spend some money there as opposed to somewhere else. But by and large, it's a technical issue and you can give technical answers and people aren't going to push back on that too much. Hopefully you are an expert on this and you can actually decide in a reasonable way what is a sensible thing, give the government a few options and tell them the pluses and minuses of both. But then you get the values-based ones, just like we talked about for the media. This is where the actual dispute, on the surface the dispute might be about science, but really it's about deep values. For example, climate change. Do you believe government should keep out of our work, or should the government come and force those obnoxious people to do what is right? Does the government have a right to stick needles in your arms, or are vaccines an evil government imposition? These sort of things. Where the real issue is an emotional, values-based issue. Now, in these situations are going to be highly controversial and political, and the role of a scientific advisor becomes a bit more difficult. First of all, very often different political organisations will have their own advisors. So, for example, there will be some think tanks that oppose climate change, and they will get some scientists to support them, and people who are in favour of doing something about climate change. And so you may well be battled against other scientists. And in this case, both scientists are often like stealth advocates. They're pretending to be objective science. Well, the science says we have to do something about climate change. No, the science is too uncertain. But they're really pushing a particular point of view, and generally speaking, the scientists in the situation will have been employed specifically to push a particular point of view. A right-wing political party is going to pick the scientists that will support its point of view, however hard it might be. And in situations where there's a lot of scientific uncertainty, you can usually find scientists, at least a few of them, who will support both points of view. In these sort of situations, generally speaking, the best role is to be a facilitator. You're not going to win or lose an argument because it's a value-based argument, but maybe you can broaden the options. You can give them, well, we could do the following things. If we do this, here's what will happen. If we do that, there's what will happen. And have you thought about doing this? And that might actually help defuse a general level of tension. So I think that's often a good option.